So yeah, welcome everyone to today's webinar on pricing and portfolio optimization in the telecommunications industry. I think it's a webinar we've had in a very similar format probably a year ago. This one is, I would say, a good update on what we did back then. We want to discuss challenges from our point of view and also what we see as a major part of the solution to these challenges. The way we usually do these webinars, we'll go through the topic, show a number of slides. We'll also show a little bit of our solution and then also give you time or the chance to ask some questions. So if you have a question, I think it's best if you write them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them towards the end of the webinar. As you can see, I think it's just the first slide, so we're moving pretty soon to a new layout. So some major changes in what we look and feel like. So this is just a short announcement of what's to come. If you're a regular guest of our webinars, you will have noticed that our usual co-host Paul isn't here. He's on vacation this week, and so I brought in an expert on the field, Mario, who's doing lots of work in the area, and will share some of his insights. He has lots of experience as our head of solution engineering, so he's definitely the right person here to help us share our experience and discuss your questions if you write them into the chat or the Q&A part. I'll do the brief introduction, then I'll hand over to Mario, come back at the end, and then yeah, let's take it from there. So just very briefly, if you don't know us, Buynomics, we're a SaaS company, and we're building a solution that helps companies optimize their pricing, their portfolio assortment, promotions, and so on. Essentially, very much the topics we're discussing in this webinar, and we do this across a number of industries, telecommunications being one of them. Other industries include consumer goods, software, and a number of other industries. And what separates, I think, us from others, and we'll go a bit into that, is that we developed a new method, what we call the virtual customers or virtual shoppers. And the idea is that we replicate the preferences of real people, put them into a model, and then you can show these virtual shoppers or virtual customers your offer, make price changes, make changes to your portfolio, and see how these virtual shoppers react to these changes. And that helps you determine with very high precision what would happen in the real world, and you can use it to find a better portfolio, optimize your pricing, do all of these revenue optimization tasks within the tool. Very short time, it's until you get an answer, and it does it with very high precision, and that typically results in a meaningful improvement in your profitability. We do this across the globe. We have customers in many countries. Mario is joining us from the US. So this, I think, it's the first webinar, as I said in the beginning, that spans across continents. Yeah, and we're very happy with this development. And with this, I'll hand over to Mario to go through the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Ingo, for the introduction. I'm super happy to be on board today and guide you a little bit through the current challenges in the telecommunications industry and what we see with the wide range of our clients specifically. So in general, what challenges do we face, and what kind of challenges can we also solve, like with our solution in the end, is basically the main questions around portfolio optimization, product optimization, and in the end also promotions and segmentation that we want to optimize here. So what we typically look at first is basically what kind of products do we actually want to offer. So what do we display to our end customers as a potential portfolio they can choose from, given all our competitors. So what do the competitors offer, and what do they change basically over the past? As we know, the telecommunications industry is a very, I would say, fast-moving industry in general. So all those competitor changes, all those feature changes that we see across our products and competitors And also the changes in customer behavior highly influence those assortment questions. And we are trying here to solve those with the goal of an optimization in terms of long-term portfolio profit, and trying to optimize for the customer lifetime value, so that we basically get the best out of our portfolio given short-term goals and also in terms of long-term optimization. What is the main challenge with all those different parts that we see here is that they are highly interdependent. So choosing between like the different offer influences also my promotion strategy, influences my pricing strategy, and influences also my channel differentiation or customer segmentation strategy. So everything goes basically hand in hand. If we go to the next slide, we quickly highlighted basically the main challenges that we see in the industry right now. And what we see from our perspective is basically that we have push and pull factors in the industry. Push factors being more driven by the market environment, by external factors, and also by regulatories, while the pull factors basically emerge from the customer behavior itself. So let me give you a quick example. A external factor or an external factor where we see a push is definitely from the shift to more short-term contracts. So for example, switching up from 24 months to 1 month runtime, contract runtime, while this is also reflected in the actual customer needs. So the customer want more flexibility and they want to have like the shorter term contract here. So this is basically putting pressure on both sides of the business or on both ends of the business. And that's the current situation that we're facing. And also, as displayed before, hand in hand with the complex portfolio and the complex question that you're trying to answer, the complexity of this external push factors and also the pull factors from the customers itself, they all add up to a very complex situation that we're trying to solve here. Going over to the next one, we have some interesting numbers and figures here pulled up from the Consumer Price Index of the United States. And what we see here is, as everyone is aware, we're in a high inflation setup at the moment. And we see that we have a lot of price increases on the majority of industries. One industry where we don't see a huge price increase currently, specifically a price decrease, is the communications and telco industry. Why is that? Typically, telco is less driven by the COGS increases we see in other industries. And what does that basically combine is that we have customers becoming more price sensitive overall because of increasing prices and basically less disposable income, and therefore also potentially less willingness to pay for specific telco products and the offerings there. So that's basically the situation we're currently in. How can we solve that? So there are some I would say traditional methods of pricing that all try to tackle those different challenges. However, there is one basically downside to each of them. And going through the challenges, so looking at competitive pricing, for example, looking at elasticity pricing or also value-based pricing, you quickly identify that, for example, competitive pricing can only answer the question like, what do your competitors do, but cannot answer the question like, how much, to what degree should you be cheaper or more expensive? So it's basically a very qualitative approach and not a very quantitative approach. Elasticity pricing, on the other hand, is quantitative, but it condenses the complexity that we just discussed of the entire market into one individual number, which also seems like a little bit of at least a workaround or a simplification of the real world here. Value-based pricing, in the end, this sounds good in theory. However, it also doesn't reflect the externalities and the market environment that we're operating in. So we've seen that there's a lot of pressure from competitors entering the market. There are a lot of things going on from external effects and so on. And the value-based pricing approach does only cover the internal value creation of your product and do not cover those external effects. So basically, all effects in isolation don't fully answer the complexity or the question of optimization of this complex portfolio. And what is needed to put them together in reality is oftentimes gut feeling. So we also have a webinar on traditional methods. If you want to check that out, I think there are the details explained a little bit further. So what could you possibly think might be a solution to answer that complexity in basically one survey that you ran? And this is basically conjoints. So, however, there are some downsides also to conjoints. So in theory, this might sound like a very good concept, and indeed it is a good concept. However, the downside is definitely shown here in those five different factors. So one is that you need to establish like your base facts each time you run one of those conjoints. So you need to collect all the information on your portfolio and on the competitor's portfolio. And then it's basically a snapshot in time. Two, it takes quite long to run such a conjoint study. So what we typically see is like roughly 1 to 2 months of runtime from like the initial setup to the actual results until you have the insights. Then, of course, the amount of scenarios or the amount of hypotheses that you can test within a conjoint is somewhat limited, depending on the range of questions that you want to pose. And also what we typically see is that with the sample size of the conjoints, also the accuracy of the insights varies a lot. So for example, having a small sample size here highly influences the accuracy and reliability of the results of the conjoint analysis. All in all, those 4 factors basically lead to the 5th one. So what we typically don't see in conjoint is like a repeatable value. So for us, it is really down to have like insights on a very like short notice. So when you want to pose a question, you want to set up a hypothesis, then you typically want the answer immediately, and you want to test a broad range. And all those factors, this can't be covered in the conjoint analysis. So that's why it's more a snapshot in time than an ongoing study that you can actually use for steering your business. So covering all that, we basically move over to the approach of Buynomics and want to dive in a little bit deeper here. So in general, what do we do at Buynomics? And I think Ingo is more than happy to show you also the example that we prepared in the tool in a few seconds. But just let me wrap up the 2 slides that we have prepared. So what Buynomics is, in essence, we use a behavioral pricing model as a core of our simulations that reflects both human preferences and traits, and also the general modeling of pricing effects. So basically all the factors that you've seen before and that you would have to like combine with gut feeling, those are underlying our behavioral pricing model. And what we then do is we enrich that by customer specific data. So we basically work together with our clients to get the respective sales data, to get the respective surveys, everything that they have at hand. And we combine those 2 top sources in our proprietary virtual customers method. And this method in the end helps us to model real customers as they were actually taking purchasing decisions. So in the end, we can see in our tool that we provide how customers would react to your portfolio changes, to your product changes, to price changes, promotions, and you can also see how different segmentations across customers would play out in the real world using our virtual customers to simulate that. If we move to the next and final slide before jumping into our tool, and we see a little bit of a deep dive here just to give you a more conceptual insights into the virtual customer technology. And it basically works the following. So we at Buynomics, we create based on our modeling and based on the insights that we receive from our clients. We build the model of virtual customers, and those virtual customers, they assign willingness to pay for the individual product features. So if we take a telecommunications contract, for example, a mobile contract, then there is a certain willingness to pay for the data volume inside that contract. But there's also a certain willingness to pay for a 5G standard, for example. And we combine all those individual willingness to pays for the entire product per customer. And what we then do is we model those millions of virtually generated customers and let them make purchasing decisions according to your historic data. So for example, if you had a price change in March, and you saw that customers behave differently, this is exactly the input that we're utilizing to calibrate and to parameterize our virtual customer model, and can therefore make very accurate predictions of future behavior, predict the demand, and then derive accordingly revenue and profit from that.
Perfect.
Now I would suggest that we jump into the tool, Ingo.
Yeah, let's thanks Mario for the overview, introduction, everything, and let's jump into a specific example. I think one of the questions, and let me switch my screen here. We had one question on a specific example, if I find it. All right, Mario, can you see my screen, the browser? Yes. Now? All right, so here's a just a very basic example, and it's based on what Mario explained in the method part. With the virtual shoppers, they have been parameterized. I'll show, we can go, happy to discuss this in more detail later on, but they've been parameterized from different data sources, survey data, for example, or past sales data, anything that's available. And from that, we have created this context where these virtual customers have preferences on different providers, provider A, B, C, D. They have a preference on speed, and the context here are mobile plans. They have a preference for technology, some like discounts more than others, and so on. And of course, they also have, I just removed it here so because it's pretty full already, they have a preference on the different data volumes. And what you can then do with the solution is you can build the offer. And here in this case, we're looking at the situation from the perspective of provider A in this market. So we're provider A. We have 5 plans from XS, S, M, L, and XL. And we have a number of competitors. So provider D is here, has a number of plans. We have provider C and so on, provider B. So these are our competitors. They have plans that are similarly structured to our plan. And what you can do essentially is you can set up the attributes for each one of them, choose different data speeds. So you can look at price changes. You can also look at what happens if you change the data volume, the speed in your plans, all of these things. You can change, you can add promotions, or if you look at sales through different channels, you can, for example, say what many do on their websites. We have a focus plan where you say, okay, most of our customers choose plan L, for example, and then this gets an extra boost, like a behavioral effect. This also, I think, noteworthy that in this solution, you can also add many of these behavioral effects like price thresholds. You can look at what happens if you highlight a product, if you show it in a different way, and so on. All of these things can be added. And the way, coming back to the question we had initially, from what perspective are we looking at this? This would be the perspective of a specific provider. where you from which you can look at the challenge and optimize the portfolio for the specific provider. In this case, here's provider A, but you could also be, for example, a retailer who is working together with different providers and wants to optimize the total offer, or has to decide with which provider to work in the overall portfolio. But the typical perspective, how our solution is used, is from a provider perspective, or when we work in other industries like consumer goods, we're typically looking at from the perspective of a specific manufacturer at the challenge in a specific channel. And then what happens? So you set up this offer, and then you show this offer, your products and your competitor products, to the virtual shoppers. And like real people, each one of them will make a decision. So here we have a larger market where we have sales maybe in a month or in a year of about 325,000. And you see here, given these prices, that you have a number of sales in each one of these cases. And with that, you have revenues, you have profits. So revenue and profits are the same in this case, because we don't have any costs. Depending on your cost structure, I didn't mention this on the previous screen, you can also offer input the cost you have with products. If there are some elements in a plan that you need to pay for, then these things can be added in here. And then you can, of course, look at, let me add the elasticity we did. What happens if I increase the price here? So here in this case, we increase the price by 50 cents, and we lose a number of sales. And this is what sets this apart from like pure elasticity models. So you see, we increase the price, we have a price elasticity of -3, lose about 1,700, but most of these customers that are lost in this plan stay within our own portfolio. Some will go to competitors, so we increase the price of our very small plan. So, and some of the people who like the small plan will go to the smallest plan of our competitors. So you have the full dynamics, and you can use it to optimize your portfolio. And see, because you get all of these interdependencies. If you have price changes, you also get all the interdependencies when you have, for example, changes in the product substance, you add or remove, for example, data volume from a plan. All of these things can be considered here, and you can, of course, also look at all of the individual plans. You see, okay, if you increase the price of one of these products, you see how many units you lose. You see the revenue per product, profit, and you can also look at the price elasticity per product. And here you see, what you always see is that the price elasticity is not a constant number, but it changes with the price change, in some cases strongly. So if you have a particular plan somewhere in the middle where there's a larger and a smaller plan, so that means it has lots of interaction with other own products, you see that the elasticities can be very high, particularly if you move close to another plan that has higher or lower data volume, for example. So you can have all the dynamics, and like a typical way to look at these, let me clean this a bit. And typical questions you might ask yourself are, for example, so this is the offer that we just looked at, just our own products. We can also look at the competitor product, but in this way it's a bit crowded. So you can look at things like, okay, what would happen if I double the data volume in all of my plans? You see, if you did that, kept all the prices the same, you would sell more. But what you would see is that a lot of the people who previously went for the M plan would now stick with the S plan, which has a much higher data volume as before. And also you win a certain number of customers. The actual revenue increase is not that high. And as we didn't do here, but if you have costs, there's a good chance that your profitability is going down if you double your data volume. So these are things you can look at very, very quickly with a tool like this. And what we see in our experience, much higher precision and much faster than with alternative solutions. And you can really use this a setup like this to answer all of your questions. Also, I think Mario spoke about this. If you have regulatory changes and you need to understand what happens if you can't do certain things anymore, or if you have to do certain things that you didn't do before, you can answer these questions very, very quickly. Or also you can see what happens if, let's say, a competitor does something. You can easily look at things like your market share. So in this case, because not a lot happened, your market share is fairly stable. But if larger things happen, your market shares can change very quickly. And these are things you can have immediate insights on once it's set up, and you don't need to consult a specific market research to answer your key questions. So I think this was just a very brief overview, and I'll go back to the presentation. And this is where, Mario, can you see it?
Yes, I can see your presentation. Yep.
Perfect. So, and just to close the circle here, previously we had the same slide where we looked at a conjoint and saw many of the shortcomings. And what we see here is you see that it's basically better in terms of the speed in which you can have answers. So you have, once it's set up, you can immediately answer questions. So something happens, you have immediately an answer to all your key questions. You can look at an unlimited number of cases, and this we demonstrated with a very high degree of accuracy. And you can also include behavioral things like price thresholds, for example, which are difficult to include in something like a price elasticity model or a conjoint model. You can really model what happens in terms of how real people make decisions. You can include all of these effects. And as we said, and just to wrap this up here, you can integrate all the key data that are typically available. So you can look at these surveys, conjoints, we see quite a lot in other price changes like the Van Westendorp and Garber-Granger models you can use. Often it makes a lot of sense to look at actual sales. So what can we learn from actual sales, also particularly in existing customers. And you can also include other sources like costs, promotion schemes, anything that's relevant to make proper decision. And you can also look at, before you go into an actual survey, for example, when you want to answer a question about maybe introducing a new brand or a new feature that hasn't been tested in the market, you can start with an expert judgment, put it in the tool, and just get a rough understanding of where the product change would lead you once you make a certain change, offer your product in a different chain or offer your product with a different brand. Before you go and make some actual research on how that specific aspect works out in the real world. So super flexible, you can integrate all the key data. That's what we've seen so far, and you get much more precise results and faster with a solution like this. And just to wrap up here, so this is one example, one study that we did in an industry where we had a massively different portfolio. We tested it with a large number of customers and demonstrated, so these products A to E are different plans with different data volumes, and generated an uplift in the share of the product and also in the profitability. And in this campaign, it resulted in a substantially higher profit increase overall than the status quo against which we A/B tested. So this was just a quick wrap up. I'll check with the questions. I think we already started answering some of them, but just for completeness, I'll go through them. If we missed anything. So B2B, in principle, it can be used in B2B. We have much more experience with the B2B context, but B2B, I think there are different fields. So it's like small B2B, like in telco, like small shops and so on, that behave somewhat like consumers. Those can be dealt with in a solution like this, for definitely, and we're doing this. Pure B2B typically has the additional angle of of differentiating between customers. This can be done in the tool, but we have somewhat less experience with this. If you have a specific challenge, we're happy to discuss and can explain how we would set this up in the tool. So we looked at a specific example. How did you calculate the accuracy of the insights? So the accuracy is essentially how close is the prediction to what actually happens, and we then look at average deviation or an R-square, depending on the context. But essentially, it's a comparison between what really happened, what the real sales were compared to the prediction. More about the virtual shopper. Yeah, happy to discuss more about the virtual shoppers. I think we're running out of time now. We have lots of material, white papers and so on the topic. That's, I would say, this is the core innovation that we brought to the field. Of course, we're happy to discuss it, what it does, how it works, and what the benefits are. If you want, if you're interested, please reach out and we'll set up a meeting. Perfect. There's just one. B2B. So I think we covered everything. Mario, did we miss anything?
No, I think we covered everything that's here in the chat. Otherwise, if there are any further questions or topics that arise from this webinar, also from other webinars, super happy to answer all your questions in detail. Then feel free to reach out, either directly to Ingo or myself, or via LinkedIn or any other source. So super happy to answer those.
Yeah, same here. How was your first webinar? Nervous?
Interesting. I liked it. I've seen a couple, but
oh, okay, perfect. All right, so yeah, thanks everyone. We'll send out, I think, the recording on Monday. Also, I think the presentation. Yeah, if you're interested, please reach out. Happy to discuss. Otherwise, have a great weekend and see you hopefully in the next webinars. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Ingo. Bye-bye.